Disputes between the United States and China have derailed discussions at the APEC summit in Port Moresby. Leaders yesterday failed to agree on a final communique for the first time in the summit's history. Peter Jennings from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and Dr Avery Poole from Melbourne University discussed what it means for Australia.
We're entering into a new era of public and fairly hard-edged strategic competition between China and the United States, which started with trade but is very quickly moving into defence and military fields as well. So I think that is a significant development, even though this was a pretty good summit for Australia, I think, in terms of the announcements of our closer relationship with Papua New Guinea. So there were some positives as well as that negative of not being able to conclude the overall communique.
Sum up for us, Mr Jennings, the problems that there are between these two nations.
Difficult to sum up maybe in two sentences, but you know, we clearly have in President Trump's worldview a major problem of the massive trade imbalance which exists between China and the United States. I actually think that's something that frankly is manageable. I mean, what is really emerging that's more difficult is frankly a Chinese push to become the dominant power in the Asia-Pacific region, backed up with massive military spending and a significantly modernised and enhanced Chinese military. And the United States, I think, has pretty clearly and decisively said that's not going to happen. The United States is not going to acquiesce. So for the rest of us in the region, we have to sort of manage our interests against what is now going to be heightened competition between Washington and Beijing, and I don't sense that this is going to go away anytime soon.
Dr Avery Poole, it's nothing new really, is it, the jostling for power in this region?
No, it's not new. I mean, we've seen since the end of World War II obviously a US strategic presence in the region and a US military presence in particular countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia, and as China has been growing economically over recent decades, an increased Chinese presence in the region as well, and more recently, of course, Chinese investment, particularly in infrastructure among the Pacific Island states. And so this is not new. It does seem to be reaching somewhat of a head or becoming more salient, particularly given the rhetoric coming from the White House, I think.
Yeah, the US has accused China of what they call debt trap diplomacy. Is both sides guilty of that?
I don't want to make a definitive statement on that per se, but I think we have to be very careful when we're looking at the way that we engage with Pacific Island states, and I'd include Australia here. Australia does seem to be paying more attention to the region, which is great, but it's hard not to be somewhat sceptical and question the motivations behind that. I think that certainly Pacific Island states have legitimate concerns and needs that major powers in the region should be facing, and it shouldn't all be about strategic power play and strategic balancing. It'd be nice if we could have some conversation around human rights and climate change and development needs. So I think we need to navigate this time fairly carefully.
Peter Jennings, the language being used by the US Vice President, the President of China, seems to be ratcheting up. I mean, even the words Cold War being used.
Yes, Mike Pence gave a speech at the beginning of October in Washington, D.C., which really, I think, indicated that not simply the White House, but the broader American machinery of government in the national security area has come to the conclusion that China is the #1 strategic threat to the US. We've kind of obfuscated around this issue for a while, but I think there is now a general sense in Washington that we're in for a period of significant rivalry. I don't know if I'd call that a Cold War, because unlike the days of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union, China and the US are deeply integrated in terms of their economies. So there will be areas of cooperation, but there will also be areas of quite open competition as well.
That was Peter Jennings from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and Dr Avery Poole from Melbourne University speaking with Lorna Dunkley.